So welcome everybody to our webinar, Extreme Heat Solutions for Equitable Cooling. I'm Lauren Swain. I'm the coordinator for PSR Colorado. That's Physicians for Social Responsibilities Colorado chapter. And we're delighted to be here today with our experts, Ian Tafoya, Colorado State Director of GreenLatinos, Megan Kemp, Director of Healthy Air and Water Colorado, and Rachel Lehman, Program Director for Black Parents United Foundation, Program Coordinator, EJ Program Coordinator. So I just want to start this session with a land acknowledgement. We honor and acknowledge that the land on which we gather is the traditional territory of the Ute, Cheyenne, and Arapaho peoples. We also recognize the 48 contemporary tribal nations that are historically tied to the lands that make up the state of Colorado. We honor and thank elders past, present, and future, and those who have stewarded this land through generations and recognize their contributions and rights within the space we share today. We also recognize that government, academic, and cultural institutions were founded upon and continue to enact exclusions and erasures of Indigenous peoples. We also acknowledge the labor of enslaved Africans and their descendants who worked this stolen land for the colonists and who continue to disproportionately face economic oppression, racism, violence, and exploitation. And we recognize their contribution and rights within the space we share today. May this acknowledgement demonstrate a commitment to working to dismantle ongoing legacies of oppression and inequities affecting all communities of color in Colorado. So I'm here with representing PSR Colorado, or Physicians for Social Responsibility Colorado chapter. And for the last 3.5 years, I've been serving our chapter. We're dedicated to promoting environmental health and addressing pollution and the climate crisis as it affects environmental health in our communities, our country, our world. I've been working on the Healthy Electric Homes, promoting building electrification for these last 3.5 years. I was new to it at the time and I was focusing on production, but I understand now that we have to also reduce our dependence on fossil fuels if we hope to be free of fossil fuels burden on our climate and our health. In case anybody thinks that this is a radical thing to be doing, fighting for climate, fighting against the fossil fuel industry's impact on our climate and health, here is a quote from the American Medical Association's official climate policy. They declare climate change to be a public health crisis that threatens the health and well-being of all individuals. And they state that they will protect patients by advocating for policies that limit global warming to no more than 1.5 degrees Celsius, policies that reduce U.S. greenhouse gas emissions aimed at a 50% reduction in emissions by 2030 and carbon neutrality by 2050. And the AMA supports rapid implementation and incentivization of clean energy solutions and significant investments in climate resilience through a climate justice lens. So we're going to start with the basics of why is PSR and why are all our groups concerned with the climate crisis? How does the climate crisis and the fossil fuels that are largely responsible for it affecting our health? So we know that people are injured and die from the firestorms, flooding and drought, and accidents associated with the climate crisis and fossil fuels. Water pollution and scarcity are also a result of the climate crisis. Poor outdoor air quality from emissions, smoke, vehicles, and buildings. And here I am bolding the topics that we're going to be addressing today in the upcoming presentations. This is an overview for everyone. We're also going to be addressing poor indoor air quality from combustion fuels like gas, and address the title of the webinar, which is Extreme Heat and Solutions for Equitable Cooling. As I mentioned before, I worked a lot on prevention of emissions from the oil and gas industry. So I was very, very concerned about the impact of especially residential oil and gas production and fracking for the last over a decade now. But you do have to not only prevent those impacts, but mitigate them in order to be just, in order to serve the population appropriately. We cannot, until we prevent it fully, we're going to have to mitigate. You cannot actually stop the climate crisis from happening. We can slow it down, but we're going to have to mitigate the effects, and that includes the effects of extreme heat. But here are a couple of the prevention strategies: reducing industrial emissions and reducing production and consumption of fossil fuels. That was what I was mostly working on prior to this. But to mitigate extreme heat, we call it the right to be cool. Strategies must include equitable access to cooling. Every one of us is vulnerable, but those populations that are low income, Black, Indigenous, and Latino are especially vulnerable due to, as we discussed in the land and labor acknowledgement, due to all of the inequities that they've experienced that deprive them from protection from extreme heat. So here are a couple of mitigation strategies, and we'll be discussing more: greening urban spaces and funding prescriptions for cooling. There are some people with health conditions and vulnerabilities that really absolutely require them to have access to cooling, whether they can afford it or not. And some of the solutions to provide affordable, equitable access to cooling involve programs like Medicare and Medicaid, allowing doctors to prescribe cooling tools. Health effects of extreme heat. Megan will go into more detail. Megan Kemp of Healthy Air and Water Colorado is our next guest. She'll go into more detail shortly. But there are acute impacts: heat stroke and heat exhaustion. There are many, many impacts on children's health, maternal health, workers' health, mental health, injuries, and premature death are all health effects of extreme heat. The societal costs of these health impacts include school closures and learning impacts for the children attending school, high healthcare costs for individuals and taxpayers that have to pay for those healthcare costs, insurance costs, and out-of-pocket costs. Labor productivity and cost are also affected, and that means higher costs for all of us. Domestic violence and crime are elevated during extreme heat waves. And again, premature death that affects all of us, without breadwinners in the family, without parents, etc. So we'll be discussing in more detail momentarily that heat pumps are one of the major solutions for climate and for cooling without gas, without fossil fuels. And the great thing about heat pumps is that they both mitigate effects on the climate, effects from the climate on human populations, and reduce emissions that would be coming from gas burning in our homes. So next I will bring up, and I'm very glad and proud to be hosting Megan Kemp, the Director of Healthy Air and Water Colorado, and her presentation of a couple of very important reports that her organization has done. Thank you, Megan.
Thank you, Lauren, and thanks for really doing a great job setting the stage here for each of us today. I'm just bringing up my presentation. Can everyone see the slideshow? Okay. Well, again, thank you, Lauren and PSR. Thanks to our partners at BPUF, Rachel and Ian. I'm excited to continue work in this space with all of these really incredible groups. I'm here today to talk a bit more about solutions to access to cooling. We'll look at, again, the health impacts, highlight some inequities from studies that my organization has done in Denver's most climate vulnerable communities, and talk about ways to make communities more resilient and adaptable to extreme heat, with a special focus on residents that are disproportionately burdened by the impacts of extreme heat. Quickly, my organization, Healthy Air and Water Colorado, most people call us HAWC. It's way less of a mouthful. We are a nonprofit, and we advocate for policy that focuses exclusively on the growing public health threats posed by climate. So we know a lot of environmental orgs are trying to address the climate crisis through a variety of means. Our lens is not necessarily to save biodiversity per se, though it does go hand in hand with our work, but what we're really trying to elevate is the conversation of how much the climate crisis is a health crisis, as Lauren mentioned. So we focus on protecting the health of our communities from all of the risks and impacts of climate change, increased risk of disease and mortality. And we know, as Lauren mentioned, and some of my partners and colleagues on this call today will get into more depth as well, we need to be centering the voices of low-income communities that are disproportionately impacted and burdened by environmental pollution and climate pollution. And we do this by building a network of health professionals from across the state. We work with folks with a clinical background, a public health background. We know that health professionals are some of the most trusted voices of credible information about climate change. So it's important to improve the advocacy among and between doctors and their patients, as well as plugging these health voices into the conversation for systems change, getting them in front of decision makers and having them spend some time advocating for why it is so critical that we see improved policy solutions to help people in need and people that are suffering from the impacts of climate change. And we need to be reducing our impact on climate change at the same time. So we work on both mitigation and adaptation and resiliency. Set the stage a little bit more. We all know that, especially here in Colorado, it's been getting increasingly hot. I didn't grow up here. I've been here for almost a decade now. And I chat with folks all the time that did grow up here. And even folks in Denver are like, we never used to need air conditioning. And that's not our reality anymore. Across the globe, across the US and here in Colorado, we're seeing record temperatures, and we expect these upward trends in temperatures to continue. We're seeing increased frequency of heat events, so increased heat wave. The amount of heat waves that are occurring, we're seeing longer duration of these heat waves. Our heat wave season is prolonged, and we expect with the trends of climate change and projections that this will just continue to worsen. So we need to make sure that we are equipping our communities to be as resilient and adaptable to these new realities as we can. This is some more information setting the context in Colorado. So over the last 37 years, Denver has seen its days over 100 degrees increase nearly 400%. I saw an article yesterday saying that if our temperature exceeded 100 degrees yesterday, it would be tied with the hottest July 30th on record here. In July 2023, just last year, Grand Junction tied its all-time hottest temperature ever recorded at 107 degrees, and we expect this to keep increasing. And this map from the Colorado Health Institute also shows that our eastern plain counties are particularly vulnerable to extreme heat. I'll breeze through this since Lauren did a great job covering this. We know that we see immediate effects of extreme heat through through heat stroke and heat exhaustion, the two main displays of acute heat illnesses. But we also know that folks with pre-existing conditions are more likely to experience complications associated with their diseases, like diabetes, pregnant people, asthma, heart disease, mental illnesses can be exacerbated, mental health is more likely to suffer. And we also know that it's impacting the cognition, the development of children's cognitive systems as well as their respiratory systems. We also know that there are more vulnerable sections of our populations, the elderly, low income, and as I mentioned, children, and folks from community of color, which we will get into more detail. We also know that this is getting more expensive, not just for Colorado, but for our healthcare systems. Over the last decade, emergency room visits from extreme heat-related illnesses more than doubled. This is likely due to improved reporting on the provider end, but we also know that more folks are experiencing more extreme heat events. Especially in rural county, we see that heat-related emergency department visits are significantly higher than the statewide rate. As I mentioned in that last slide, our rural counties on the Eastern Plains are particularly vulnerable, and often access to healthcare facilities is more limited in these rural counties. So it's really important that we're focusing a lot of our resources there as well. Lauren mentioned that premature death is often associated with as one of the impacts of extreme heat. We see higher death rates, especially for Black residents and older adults. And these disparities are expected to widen unless we are targeting our solutions at closing these disparities and bridging these gaps. In 2022, our organization partnered with our sister organization, Open Answer, to get boots on the ground surveying Denver's most heat vulnerable communities. So we collected close to 1,000 surveys to gather both qualitative and quantitative data to understand barriers and access to cooling, who really is struggling the most in terms of being able to access cooling in light of extreme heat. We found 3 main determinants of inequities in terms of being able to access cooling. One being race. You'll see a chart on the right there, but 1 in 4 Black or African American respondents did not have access to cooling in their homes. We should note that we define cooling as any central window air conditioning unit, swamp cooler, or heat pump. The next determinant is income. Folks, 1 in 4 residents with incomes below $35,000 lacked cooling, compared to no percentage of residents making over $150,000 in their household. And then your home ownership versus renter status is also a big determinant. Renters are 20% more likely than homeowners to live without cooling in their homes. So while we're considering solutions, we need to be really elevating this conversation and targeting our solutions at making sure we are addressing the inequities and these populations are prioritized when we are designing solutions to get folks access to cooling in their homes. We're working toward this right to cooling. So in this past legislative session in Colorado, we took a big step in that direction. Within our warranty of habitability, we updated that in Senate Bill 94, Safe Housing for Residential Tenants. This updated, among many other protections for renters, which are some of the most burdened populations in our state. We updated policies that allow for tenants to bring appropriate cooling and that any existing cooling on site secured by the landlord requires the landlord to fix it within a certain time window. So we're making sure that folks have the ability to, at the very least, bring their own cooling to their rental unit. This is just a step in the right direction. We need additional protections for tenants. We need to address the affordability of utilities, our energy bills. We need to also be implementing additional technical and financial assistance for energy security, as well as being able to access technologies that are energy efficient, like heat pumps. We have stackable incentives from our federal, state, local governments, as well as utility companies here in Colorado, but it's often still out of reach for low-income families. So making sure that, again, we're targeting those solutions and building out additional pathways to make sure that these populations have access to the most affordable and energy efficient cooling technology in light of extreme heat. We worked with RMI last year and published a report about how state and local lawmakers can advance policy solutions to protect these at-risk populations. So we know that there are various mechanisms that they can utilize via legislation and or regulations, updating statutes to really prioritize protections and increase access for these populations to access cooling. We can fund cooling policies, and we're designing successful policies through utilizing that funding and existing pathways, as well as creating new pathways. There are a variety of ways that we can go in terms of updating our statewide policies. We have things like codes and standards, for example, and hand in hand landlord obligations. We can be updating our building performance standards, ensuring that renters are elevated in those conversations, that landlords are obligated to provide cooling. They should be and can be obligated to provide energy efficient cooling. There should be protections in place for tenants in terms of having their cooling fixed so that they are not having to relocate if at all possible, and making sure that they are able to also access legal help if those requirements are not met on the landlord's end. We can also do things like utility disconnection bans. If you are low income, you can be protected from having your energy turned off if you miss an energy bill during a high heat experience, for example. There's a lot more. I'm going to stay high level for the purpose of this, but I encourage you all to read the report. I have QR codes in slides at the end of this presentation, walking through in more depth exactly what these policy mechanisms look like. We also know at the local level, we can pursue certain protections, especially for renters. We can establish, just like we have minimum temperature threshold requirements. I live in an apartment building. If my heat were to break in the wintertime, my landlord is required to fix it within a certain amount of time or provide a heater for me, because it cannot fall below the safe temperature for my dwelling unit. We should and can be doing the same thing with regard to maximum indoor temperatures. Our reality is, yes, maybe 2 decades ago, that was not necessary here in the Front Range of Colorado, but given the frequency and severity of extreme heat events here in this modern age, and our anticipation and projections for them to keep getting worse, we need to come to the reality and come to the conclusion that we need to be making sure folks are safe from higher indoor air temperatures through establishing maximum indoor temperature thresholds. And we can also build out and improve upon minimum rental standards, for example, things that I was already mentioning, making sure that landlords have certain obligations to ensure the livability and the safety and health standards for the rental units that they oversee. And there are existing pathways. Some states like Oregon have, as Lauren alluded to earlier, started accessing funding for climate resiliency through Medicaid. How cool would it be if a provider could just write a prescription for someone, for example, with respiratory illness, to be able to access a heat pump? This is our new reality, and we can be doing things like this here in Colorado and across the country. Oregon is in the middle of a 5-year pilot program, and we're excited to see how it goes, but we should be pursuing these things here and now in Colorado. There's also funding streams like Low-Income Home Energy Assistance Program. That's federal funding that is also distributed to the states. Here in Colorado, it's just the LEAP program. But we're making sure that folks can pay their energy bills and be able to turn on their air conditioning when they need it most. And there's also funding streams from FEMA for extreme heat events. We're seeing states start to tap into that funding as well. In addition, there are stackable incentives, like I mentioned, from things like the Inflation Reduction Act, making sure that these are accessible to residents, making sure they're digestible, that the outreach is being done so folks know that these resources are available to them to make energy efficient HVAC, like heat pumps, more attainable for their families. So when we're considering what these policy solutions look like, and you all should and can plug in to advocate for them, we're protecting tenants, we're prioritizing energy efficiency, which will also go hand in hand with ensuring affordability of folks' energy bills. We're making sure we're contextualizing it in what is appropriate for their locality. Maybe the maximum indoor air temperature threshold makes sense for several Front Range communities, but maybe it doesn't make as much sense for some of our mountain towns. Plan for compliance and enforceability. We need to make sure that landlords are following up and being accountable for the new protections we're putting in place for tenants, for example. And then we can't just do all of this without providing technical assistance to the folks that are trying to tap into these solutions, like accessing heat pumps. Before I wrap up, I just want to leave each of these slides up for a moment in case you wanted to read a little bit more. This first one is our extreme heat in Denver, the report to community that I highlighted, the inequities that we found in Denver metro communities in terms of being able to access cooling. You'll be able to read some really fantastic quotes from people about their lived experiences. And I would love to answer any additional questions that come out from that. These reports are also available on our websites. This QR code links to the policy solutions. It goes into more depth about both the state and policy pathways, as well as those different funding streams. If you are curious about learning more, we'll certainly be pursuing some of these in the state legislature in the coming year. So please reach out if you're interested in learning more and advocating. And I think that's all I have, Lauren. I'm excited to turn it over back to Lauren to introduce the next panelist. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much for that excellent presentation, Megan. I learned a great deal, and I look forward to studying your reports in greater depth. I see that we have a couple of Q&A questions, and we'll have Q&A at the end, but thank you very much, Maynard Clark, for sharing your questions. I encourage everybody else to put your questions in the Q&A and also to ask your questions, raise your hand, however you'd like, once all the presentations are complete. And I also wanted to note that I will be sharing a recording and as many resources as I possibly can, including the reports from Healthy Air and Water Colorado, reports from PSR, and really some excellent material. I would highly recommend just searching for extreme heat health impacts on Center for American Progress's website. They're an incredible resource. So I'm excited next to introduce Rachel Lehman of the Environmental Justice Program Coordinator of Black Parents United Foundation. Thank you so much for being here, Rachel. I look forward to hearing your thoughts on these matters.
Thanks, Lauren. Thanks, Megan, for setting it up. That was great. Lots of great facts in there. So as Lauren said, I'm with the Black and Brown Parents United Foundation, and our kind of service area is Commerce City, North Denver, and Aurora. And some things that we've been working on in the past are the breathe policy. So we're really trying to find out ways to make practical, education and notification systems. My cat might make an appearance, just a heads up. And also we'll be beginning to do some air monitoring in Aurora, starting here in the next couple of months. And so we really just want to encourage citizen science and people to be curious and be able to, look into their world and see what's going on. So I think I'm just going to repeat a little bit of what Megan said, but just to kind of put the nail in the coffin there. NASA scientists said that we are right now living in unprecedented times. We are in we have had 13 months of consecutive temperature records. So this is no joke. This is happening. And it is dangerous. Prolonged heat to exposure to anybody, honestly, but especially people with pre-existing conditions and other kinds of mortality. Sorry, my cat got me distracted. Other types of issues as far as like respiratory issues and obesity, things that mostly disproportionately impact the communities and people of color. And so oftentimes people of color have greater incidences of respiratory diseases and chronic diseases. So the heat just exacerbates it. And then, so my presentation is going to focus on three main things: the legalities, like right now, and also there's some things that our cities and our states can be doing. So what are those things? What are some things that maybe you haven't even thought of? Let's just vision that a little bit. I think sometimes we get stuck and we're like, oh, we can't. Well, let's vision it, and then we'll be able to do it. And then finally, I want to just kind of give you some practical solutions that you can implement in your day to day. And I'm really speaking to those parents out there who have children who, have to get through these brutal summer days somehow. So I'm going to give you some tips on that. So the legalities, as Megan, talked about, renters are really at a loss here. Renters lose out in the state of Colorado. If you're a homeowner, obviously you can do whatever you want to your home. But if you're a renter, you are kind of at the mercy of your landlord. And a lot of landlords, had this thinking about Colorado that you didn't need air conditioning. That maybe 50 years ago was absolutely true, but it is not the case right now. And the Inflation Reduction Act, this is the thing that's just kind of mind-blowing to me, because there is lots of federal funding that's out there in order to help this situation out. So for instance, Block Power is a company that's working with the government to make sure that heat pumps can go into homes. And those heat pumps are really kind of a new wave of how to get, reduce emissions, get ahead of this climate crisis, and to make affordability for all families and homes. And here's the kicker: schools in Colorado aren't required to have air conditioning. And I had one of my children was a student at East High School, and there were literally closing days at the beginning of the year or at the end of the year where it was too hot. It was too hot for them to get. So we're missing out on valuable days of school, and we're also making those children miserable. If I get a little bit sweaty, I can't think. I'm sorry. So I'm not going to be able to be the best student I could possibly be if I'm really hot. And just to let you know that Governor Polis vetoed HB 24-1307, an HVAC improvement bill for Colorado schools. And this wasn't even going to come out of the state budget. This was actually going to come out of the federal budget to update all of the cooling in the schools. Obviously, there are newer schools that put it in already, but this isn't just schools, but it's also buses. So making sure that those are cool as well. Structural shifts, some things that we can do in our structures, and how can we sort of envision just all these little points. They're not solutions in and of themselves, but if we add them all together, they make a solution. They make it so that this world is a lot more livable. So number one, ditch the car. And this has to do with being able to go to work, and understand that it's hard to not have a vehicle, especially if you have children. And also, if you are starting to live in these suburban areas that are really far out of the city core, there really should be some kind of notification if you end up buying a house out in Green Valley Ranch. That house has to come with 2 cars, because you're not going to be able to get anywhere without 2 cars, especially if you have children. Flex time. This is a really smart thing. They tell you, Excel sends me messages all the time. Don't cook before 7 o'clock. Don't use your electricity. Why are we trying to do things from 9 to 5? That makes no sense. We should be shifting our workloads to maybe later times and maybe earlier times, and having that middle part of the day, just sort of everybody chill, everybody stay home. And then working from home. This is really crucial. I don't know how many times I have driven to one meeting that could have been done on Zoom. And thank you, Lauren, for doing this as a webinar so that it can, we can all stay in our cool homes and not have to drive a car. We just save so many carbon emissions. It's great. So we need to do more of this. Make sure that we can, if that if that meeting, think about it, is this meeting actually going to be more useful in person or not? And there actually is a lot of research that says that productivity in employees goes down as more in-person meetings go up. So, people don't need to meet all the time. And then also more public transportation. Recently, we had two bills that passed, and the whole goal that were around environment. The whole goal was to have these fee-based fines that actually end up going to public transportation. I will believe it when I see it. Colorado especially is really kind of a place where we do need public transportation all up and down I-25, because people literally are living further and further away because that's where they can afford, but then they also have to have that cost of a car. And let me just put this out there. For the first time in decades, Denver was an attainment during the COVID lockdown, when everybody had to stay home and everybody had to work from home and nobody drove their cars. There are photographs that are just mind-blowing, the before and after COVID attainment. And it was really, it really is one of those things where you're like, wow, this is what could be possible. We could be breathing such cleaner air. Number two, cool the city. Our city's the urban landscape is merciless. There are so many places where the city just in and of itself is in the structures and the way that it's built are hot. So one thing would be to reclaim ex-urban areas. So all of those areas where we have vacant buildings just standing there for years. I've been here for 17 years. Some of those are still standing from when I first got here. We need to get rid of those. Those are not being useful. We need to reclaim the ex-urban areas. We need to reclaim parking lots. I am sick of seeing parking lots surrounded by fences. It's the most ugly thing ever. I know the whole idea is, we can't have homeless people camping out on this parking lot. Okay, so what we need to do is totally take up the concrete and make these into small urban spaces, because there's also the fun fact that Denver has less green space than New York City. We need more. Green space cools the earth. The plants are good for us. And planting more trees and foliage. And this is a really interesting solution. It's very simple, but turn off the street lights, and also restaurant lights, restaurant lights, bank lights, whatever. We need to turn them off, because each day pollution from car tailpipes and factory towers pour into cities. Then each night, a process in the atmosphere cleans up some of this murky mess. A chemical called a nitrate breaks down the chemicals that would otherwise have formed smog and ozone. But this wonder chemical only works in the dark because sunlight destroys it, and also artificial light destroys it. So it turns out, if we have street lights, the natural process of breaking down these chemicals that get pumped up during the day, that doesn't get to happen. And honestly, I'd like to see some stars. That would be amazing. So but I don't know if people know this, but we should just be encouraging more darker skies. We should be encouraging, businesses, turn off your light. At night, I see the Chase Bank right across the street. It's a very bright light. It's letting me know it's there. And then finally, we need third spaces. I don't know if anybody's heard of this term, but third spaces are spaces that aren't your home or your school or your work. These are other places. Parks should have trees, big trees. They should have trees. If you look at a lot of our parks here in Denver in particular, they're sad. They don't have trees. And they should have cooling awnings, things that kind of, shade the park. There should be operable water fountains for families to be able to drink from. And there should be non-plastic play equipment, more splash pads, more pools that are accessible. I don't know if you know this, but there are pools over in Central Park that are private pools, but they also are public pools, but people have to pay a whole lot of money for. That shouldn't be the case. There should definitely be incentivizing free public pools and splash pads and all of these ways for parents to take their kids to get cool. And also, I mean, we are coming to this conclusion that in the summertime, it's too hot to play outside and there might be an air quality alert. So we really can't play outside. So we need to think about maybe indoor recreation spaces. This will also work in the wintertime as well. So I understand that there's things like monkey business or jumpolines and things like that, but those are often really costly. So we really do need to plug into having those kinds of opportunities for families to go play that are affordable. Maybe the city can subsidize some free passes. Okay, so here's some ways that you can survive the heat on a budget. Okay, one of them is to do a family camp out in the living room. Shut off all the doors in all the house and make sure that you only cool one area. So everybody just sleeps in the living room. You all make a blanket for it. Kids will love it. It'll be fun. But you just kind of thinking in terms of like, I don't need to cool this whole house. I can just cool this one area. And same thing with portable air conditioning units. It's a really good idea to have something that's portable that you can take with you. You go into the kitchen, you bring it with you. You go into your bedroom, you bring it with you. Heating and or cooling in a whole big space, it wastes energy, it's not efficient. And also, I don't really feel as cool, to be honest with you. I feel more cool when I have that cooler just directly hitting me like 3 inches away. That's better. So yeah, there's that one. Blackout curtains. So get some blackout curtains. Make sure that the sun can't hit you. Get some blinds that that really are meant for UV deflection. And then there's this pretty affordable little trick you can get. It's UV window film. You put the film on the window and it actually helps to bounce that light right out. You can still see out of it, but these are just some tips to kind of help cool, just even incrementally adds up over time. Take, cool shower playtime. Put the kids in their swimming suit and let them have at it in the shower. Like give them the shower head. Fill them with the water guns and help them, like they can shoot each other in the shower. Have that fun time. Come home, cool them off, get them really, a lot more refreshed from being outside. And it's also a really good idea just to kind of rinse off when you come in from outside anyway. The pollutants, especially on high ozone days, are pretty brutal on your body. Come up with some crock pot and air fryer options. Like don't use your stove. Have the kids just throw whatever they want to in an air fryer and see what happens. And use somebody else's air. This is kind of a fun thing. Libraries have great summer programming. You can also go to indoor mall areas and they have play areas there. Recreation centers are great. Free museum days, summer movie passes. These are really, I will tell you, as a single mom, I totally exploited free museum days and free movie days. My kids know about museums, that's for sure. But that's a way to just kind of escape the heat in your home and be able to get outside and be cool. And then finally, Megan talked about this earlier to a degree, but it's important to stay healthy. I just recently learned from my sister, who is a nurse, that you're supposed to have electrolytes. I was feeling rather faint and nauseous. I have ADHD and I was taking, I take Adderall, and who knew, but when you take ADHD and certain other stimulants and antibiotics and antidepressants, you shouldn't be out in the sun. It will make you sick. You will not feel happy. You need to keep hydrated. And sunscreen and hats. Make sure that you are wearing all of these things when you go outside. They're just one way to keep a barrier between you and all of that radiation from the sun. And I'm happy to share these lists with folks and talk with you about any of these. Yeah, over to you, Lauren.
Wow, Rachel, I learned so much from you. I am very excited for all the solutions that you gave us. And I just want to chime in very briefly that we need, and I will help you build the movement for working from home. There should be incentives, there should be directives, there should be, employers should have to have a reason to call everybody to the road and into the office, in my opinion, because it is so polluting and it's very inequitable for people who don't have good access to transportation. I appreciate so many other things that you said. And we'll definitely share the resources that you mentioned. And we'll have Q&A in a moment. But lastly, we have Ian Tafoya, Colorado State Director for GreenLatinos. Thank you very much for being here, Ian. I look forward to hearing what you have to say and share.
All right, thank you, Lauren, and hi to everyone else. And thank you, Rachel, for sharing how to do it on a budget. You know, I grew up in a low-income household, definitely spent a lot of hours at the library. We didn't have air conditioning. We did find a way to get a swamp cooler, which made a difference. But now it seems to be getting so hot that a swamp cooler just doesn't work as well as it did growing up in Denver. You know, there has been some movement and some success. And I think you've heard that of the waking up of the people before it's too late, although there are impacts that are happening to people every single day. I want to start by, you know, thanking especially HAWC and our other partners, PSR Colorado, Black and Brown Parents United Foundation, and all the others who've advocated tirelessly at the Capitol. It's no joke, y'all. But I will tell you, they don't really have great air conditioning in there either. I tell you to come in out of there, but it's not amazing. In fact, it's a rather hot building. But we need people in the seats. There's one thing that you can take away from this. It's that advocacy comes through doing the work. There's no magic button or elected official who can do it alone. They need great ideas and they need people to organize behind them, to show up and to testify. And organizations like ours can help you do that. Whether it's your first time or your 100th time, you can find community, I think, with groups like GreenLatinos and others who want to see your voices be turned into reality. You know, GreenLatinos, for those who are not familiar with us, you know, we've been around for about 16 years. We were founded in Washington, D.C. We were initially the National Latino Coalition for Climate Change. We were seeking amendments and change for our community at the turn of 2008 when Barack Obama had just first taken over as president, and we had an opportunity to move a lot of federal climate policy. For a long time, we functioned under that name, and about 12 years ago, we changed our name to GreenLatinos and broadened the scope of the work that we're doing. And we realized that we can't just have a one-way street. We have to have a multiple-way street. And that's where our state programs came from. I've been a member of GreenLatinos for 10 years, a national Latino conservation organization fighting for environmental justice, networking people from different backgrounds, whether that's traditional frontline environmental justice groups, people in public health, people who work for the government, people who have solutions like tree planting or solar panels. We're trying to get people to share their resources and take advantage. And I think in this moment, we can take advantage of this abundance of resources that are available to us at the federal level. And thanks to some of the work we've done at the local level, I see here in the chat, the local tax in Denver for the climate initiative. You know, I was the spokesperson for that ballot issue. I think it was driven by people who said, our backs are against the wall and we needed to seek the leadership that we needed. And sometimes, and we're fortunate in Colorado, you can do that with a pen and a book and enough people who are willing to organize to pass a good law and work to implement it. You know, so GreenLatinos also works at the local level, really helping connect and coach local governments on how to better engage communities in the Hispanic, Latino, Latine, Boricua, Puerto Rican, Colombian, Venezuelan, you name it, a wide variety of individuals who come from a varied cultures, but have a similar background in our love for the earth. And, you know, when we talk about outdoor impacts, I really want you to be thinking about or heat extremes to people who work outdoors. So think about the people who are contractors. Think about the people who are landscapers. Think about the people who are growing your food and pulling your food every single day. These are workers that their lives are drastically changing. Whether they are being exposed to outdoor heat extremes, they are often to outdoor air pollution extremes from wildfire smoke that's impacting their lungs, to cold snaps and other things. I myself come from a family of contractors. I worked as an electrical apprentice. I don't think that my hands ever felt colder than when I was working inside of a concrete building, trying to build a building for other people. Now, these extremes are a reason why when you look at the surveying, that Latinos in general are the highest category of people who are concerned about climate change. It's impacting us now. Our schools are like Black and brown schools, often in low-income communities that do not have the air conditioning. In Denver, we're fortunate. There's a ballot issue, a bond that's coming. I had a chance to sit on that task force for the Denver Public Schools, where we finally will see, after all of these years, air conditioning put in and cooling put into every single school in Denver. It's 2024. It's kind of surprising that we're still in that place, but nevertheless, we are. I want to take a minute to talk about some of the other advocacy that I think connects to the impacts of heat. And you heard this a little bit earlier, I think, in Rachel's conversation, where she was saying there are chemicals that are coming out of the oil and gas and from transportation, which is the burning of oil and gas, that combine with the heat, with the UV radiation, and form ozone that is very damaging to our lungs. A lot of those pollutions are measured by the National Ambient Air Quality Standards. It's the things that you hear when someone tells you it's a red day or a green day, whether you can go outside with your kids or go for a walk with your grandma, or if my fiance has asthma, we have to know whether or not we need to be more prepared with an inhaler. It's a reality that people are facing. And we have, with GreenLatinos and our partners, taken on monitoring to understand what's happening. We've taken on emissions from oil and gas and the transportation sector. We fought for zero emission vehicles and transit. All of these, as you heard, are solutions to mitigating what some of the worst harms from increased heat to air quality are. You also heard Megan talk about mitigation factors, and you heard Rachel talk about this with the urban greening initiatives. GreenLatinos received a $25 million USDA grant from the Biden Build Back Better initiative to distribute tree planting resources to communities all across the United States. We know that green roofs and park spaces and stormwater management, all of these things go hand in hand with our air quality and heat and temperature. And GreenLatinos has a roadmap to distribute those monies across the United States. But we also have groups here in Colorado who won those resources. Aurora, America for the Conservation and the Arts, Groundwork Denver, all community groups and governments that are working to diligently put more trees into our landscape. And I think what's really neat, you can see cooperation happening with community groups, with Denver Urban Gardens, who are saying, well, if we're going to build that, why don't we have a food forest? If we're going to build that, why don't we reclaim this space to have multiple uses? And I think that level of creativity is incredibly important for us to be thinking about. I heard, Rachel, you mentioned for a second about homelessness. And I want to be very clear that those that are unhoused are the most exposed 24 hours a day to poor air quality, to heat, to cold extremes, to a lack of sanitation. We will see that some cities like Denver have open cooling centers or warming centers in order to help people meet those needs. But wrapped up in all of this is the housing. And so what you heard from Megan earlier with habitability and warrantability, we have to do more with the environmental movement to build cooperation and collaboration with the environment. Whether that is making sure you have the right to heating and cooling as a basic right, or that makes sure that you can afford to live where you are so you don't have to drive from a million miles away, whether that's being aware that some of the places where affordable housing is built and where the land is the cheapest is actually the most toxic. Now, modern redlining in my mind is the fact that we will continue to build affordable housing and put hundreds of people in harm's way next to old landfills leaking methane, next to concrete facilities. I could go on and on about the different types of facilities that are impacting our community, and GreenLatinos and myself with University of Colorado and Denver have actually put together a tool that can help us make a better decisions about where our land use should be built from a buildable lands analysis, which is technically a term of where should we put these things and how do we measure where to do it. What I know is that a situation of saying go where it's poor, we've remediated the land, but not really, is going to continue to cause harm for people down the road. We didn't pass the Environmental Justice Act to go backwards, right? We passed the Environmental Justice Act and continue to push for this policy and advocacy so that we can move forward and learn from the past, because that history is critically important if we hope to make a change or make a difference. I wanted to close by just talking briefly about our overall vision for GreenLatinos nationally. We have a framework that we call the Latino Climate Justice Framework. It takes into account many issues that are impacting the community, from outdoor workers to heat extreme, to flooding, how that impacts water quality. It's available online. I will drop the link here. We're actually going through a next revision of it, but it's been co-signed by hundreds of Latino organizations across the United States. And I want to shout out another organization, Black Hive, who's done an amazing work to bring Black frontline community leaders together to write a new deal for themselves. There's also a Black-Red New Deal, Black-Red-Green New Deal that is more of a tribal and indigenous perspective on what we need to serve our communities. Each one of our communities are unique, but we all have to work together. We have to call in all directions and support each other. I did want to just take a minute, if that's okay. I think I still have a few because we went over on the last one. But I just wanted to show you a video that GreenLatinos has made that really sums up the Latino climate justice framework. And it zeroes in on what the impacts are for health in outdoor workers in particular. This is an experience that is shared, not here, just here, but across the United States. Excuse me, I'm trying to get this to, oh no. Hold on 1 second. Let's see if this will work. Went backwards. Okay, here we go. And hopefully you'll...
Andamos trabajando y los quedaba lejos el agua.
We were working and the water was far away.
Andamos trabajando para llegar al camión. Y hasta que no saliéramos
we
del
had
surco,
to go to the bus, but
para cambiar el surco, yo no supe de mí.
when I was going to change the water, I became disoriented and I fainted. And the guys, my coworkers, they were the ones who revived me. A guy and a girl poured water on my back, on my head, and they were the ones who helped me. That happened to me twice. It happened to me twice, and I was thinning, and it took me a long time to wake up. During 45 minutes, they thought I was dead. And these guys, it's thanks to them that I'm alive. Thank God that I'm alive.
Aquí nuestra comunidad está rodeada de muchos campos agrícolas.
Our community here is surrounded by many agricultural fields, and it makes it easy for many companies to bring workers from central Mexico.
Cruzan trabajadores agrícolas, ya que estamos
So
en la
they cross
línea
the
fronteriza
border,
entre Estados Unidos y México.
and since we're at the borderline between the US and Mexico, it's an area that's very busy, very transited. From 11 p.m. to 2 or 3 in the morning, that's when they cross the border to start working at 5 or 7 in the morning. Really bad. Really bad. Until now, I haven't told anybody except this girl, my family, and the coworkers.
Okay, I don't have time to show the entire video, but the point that I want to make to you and why I chose to show that clip to you is because what I have not mentioned yet is status. Your legal status in the United States and how that impacts your rights and the ability to use your voice to seek protections as a renter, a homeowner, a business owner, your ability to protect yourself and your family are minimal. We're seeing this as an even bigger issue as more and more people are beginning to migrate to the United States as a result of the climate crisis. This is something that will continue to happen. Whether they have outdoor working jobs or they're outside washing your windows, these people are being impacted every single day by the heat. The Latino climate justice framework encompasses many of the issues that I talked with you today, and I'd be happy to talk offline with others. But just remember, at the end of the day, we all need water. We all deserve the right to live, and we all have the right to cooling. Thank you.
Thank you so very much for that, Ian. And if we have time at the end, I would very much like to show the audience and see for myself the remaining part of that video, if you'd like to share it. Yeah, again, I've learned so much from you. This is a very, very important angle, a very important factor. A determinant of health is status, immigration status, income status. Many many things affect our status in this society. And I really just think it's very important to look at, we supposedly have a representative government, a democracy. We do have the right to vote if we are citizens of the United States, and that is a privilege. But unfortunately, our representatives are marching to different drummers than the vote, and the voters themselves are subject to influence from the oil and gas industry, the fossil fuel industry, and other large industries that are largely responsible for the climate crisis and the extreme heat crisis that we find ourselves in. And as we try to engage in policy work to correct that, we do confront their influence every day in the Capitol. And a lot of us have been working very hard at it for a lot of years. And I want to say there are probably many of you out there who wonder if it's worth it. But the more of us who are fighting, the more influence that we have, and the less burden we each have if we engage others in this fight and let our representatives know what we want and consider running for office ourselves or recruiting others, supporting others who can champion these solutions in a reasonable, at a reasonable speed instead of, unfortunately, a snail's pace at this time. But we have made progress, and we celebrate our progress every year. We have the warranty of habitability change. And Rachel, you mentioned, and Jan Bronner wanted to know for her Q&A question, what was the bill that you mentioned that was vetoed that maybe we could bring back again and pass?
That was HB 24-1307. It's a HVAC improvement bill for Colorado schools.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Yeah, and that did have a lot of support, even in the labor movement. It was a great synergy between environment and labor. So I do hope that that will come back. You lose once, but you can come back again and again until you win. And that's what we all need to do. And I hope we'll all do it together. So I see some questions about the habitability requirement or statements. So does anybody want to take on Maynard Clark's comment? The habitability requirement was part of the emerging standard that in many states helps courts determine that there is no right to smoke, or that indoor air quality is can be should be smoke free, etc. Does anybody want to weigh on that? And Maynard, so go ahead.
I tried to answer it initially, the initial question of how many states have it, and I think it is variable, like based on how comprehensive the idea is. I think we see it being, very variable across states, right? We know that there are states that are much more landlord friendly. Colorado being one of those states. I think Colorado has some of the least stringent responsibilities for landlords to give tenants adequate protections for habitability, and that's a very difficult challenge to fight. It's an uphill battle. That's why we, while it is just a stepping stone, it was a major victory this year to achieve so many additional protections within our state's warranty of habitability, which fortunately is statewide statute. I think, we see states like Oregon, which are a lot more renter friendly, where they're more progressive in implementing statewide statute and through legislation to provide adequate protections and ensure that folks have safe and healthy homes to live in and have access to improve the livability of their homes. I'm not sure if anyone else on the call wants to call or chime in on this, but I think it is worth noting that, there's a significant gap and a large degree of variability in terms of what protections states actually provide for renters.
Absolutely.
I mean, I could chime in on the sense that the lobbying power of the major property owners and the landlords, the property association, the real estate REITs, as they call them, who control many, many properties in a system that allows resources to be spent in elections, has significantly hampered the ability for renters to advocate for themselves. And before I worked for GreenLatinos, I actually was involved in writing of an update of habitability and warrantability. And then 5 years later, we had to come back again because there were loopholes that were created at that time, or there were people who were participating. And so I think what's most frustrating for me is like you make a progress, it seems to get eroded, you come back, and sometimes there can be, I don't want to say conflict, but putting new ideas in when you're trying to close old loopholes can pose an even harder problem to fight, right? And so I just want to say that, like, no matter where you are in the country, under Citizens United, the power of renters is diluted in order to change these policies to protect themselves.
I think one thing that I want to just add on to that is there is a revolving door of politicians that work in politics, and then they revolve out into real estate development, and they kind of go in and out of these spaces. And so it is a huge conflict of interest, and whatever we can do to try to like minimize those conflicts of interest, then they're going to start making decisions on behalf of the people, which is their job, not on behalf of their future earnings.
Absolutely. And the more they hear from us, the more likely they are to respond. And also, you know, you share with your networks, you publicize your own way. You have a blog, you have a webpage, you have social media, you have networks. Tell your mom, tell your kids, tell your friends, make sure that they know what's going on, and we'll do our best to keep you informed as well. Does anybody else have a question they'd like to ask? Raise your hand, write it in the Q&A. Okay, well, thank you very much for joining us, everyone, tonight. And I want to let you know that next week, about this time at 4 p.m. to 5:30, PSR Colorado is hosting Local Government Planning for Healthy Electric Homes webinar, and we'll be covering policy and programming from the city of Denver, the city of Boulder, county of Boulder, Fort Collins, Crested Butte. And I hope you'll join us for our experts, to hear from our experts about that. And I'll be sharing that link with everyone, as well as all the resources that people have, our experts here tonight have shared. And please be in touch with me at coordinator@psrcolorado.org if you have any questions or want to follow up. I'm going to ask one more time. Would anybody like to say anything, or does anyone have any questions they'd like to share?
Lauren, would you like me to share the end of the video then?
Yes, please. Please do go ahead. Ian, I would love to see it. Thank you.
Mi familia y los que miraron el trabajo, los compañeros y los
My
contratados
family and the coworkers,
de hablar.
they have the right to speak up and defend themselves, because if it's not for us, who is going to pick the fruit, the vegetables, all of those things from the field? Nobody, because I don't think they will come to the harvest to do the harvest. If it's not for us who wake up early, whether it rains or thunders, we have to go to work because they don't help.
There are many things that are standing in the way of solutions to the climate effects that are affecting farm workers and other communities. Part of it is greed, because the lobbying done by many of the business groups is quite powerful, but there's also a certain level of lack of knowledge and lack of awareness about what these communities are suffering.
enfoque de Campesinos Sin Fronteras es promover la educación entre
The focus
las
of Campesinos
familias de
Sin Fronteras is to
trabajadores
advance
y
education
la
and
comunidad,
awareness amongst
ayudándoles
agricultural
a
workers
promover la
and
salud y la
communities,
sustentabilidad
thereby
de
helping
las familias
improve
aquí
health and
campesinas.
sustainability of farm worker
Localmente
families.
hacemos lo que podemos
Locally, we do
apoyándonos,
what we
tratamos de
can by
ayudar.
advocating for them.
Pero
We
en realidad para un
try to help them
cambio
out, but
largo tiempo se
for
necesita
a very long
esa
time we haven't seen changes.
que
More
más
advocacy is needed.
organizaciones
We need that. We need
tengan
more
presencia a
organizations
esta población y
to
aboguen y
keep this
pidan
population in mind,
por
advocating for them
cambios
and
políticos que nos
requesting
ayude.
policy changes to help
Hay
them.
muchas leyes, hay muchas políticas
There are many laws and many
en lugar
policies
ya, pero
in
no se
place
enforzan.
already, but they're
No
not
son
enforced.
enforzadas. No,
They
no pueden decir que deben de hacer esto, debe ser el otro, pero a la hora de la hora no se
dictate
enforza.
you do this, do that, or
Entonces,
you can't do this, or you
dentro
can't do
de
that. But at the end of
esas
the day, it's
políticas que se
still
están
happening.
presentando,
So
debe
among
de
the
tener
policies that are
una,
being presented, there should
como, no sé,
be
como un candado, algo que
there should
un filtro que
be
asegure
something
que
that ensures
verdaderamente
that
se van a implementar. Porque pueden hablar como
they really are going to be
las palabras
implemented
se
and
la
that they
lleven
are
el
going to
viento,
be enforced.
pero cuando no se
Because words
implementan
can
de
be
una manera
meaningless
como
when
debe
they're
de
not
ser, que
implemented
haya
as they
protección,
should be
que
to
haya
provide
supervisión,
protection.
que así se está llevando a cabo,
When there's no
básicamente
supervision,
porque lo
the
he
same
visto
thing
con
will continue to
The
happen.
Latino
I've
Climate
seen it for many
Justice
years.
Framework helps bring
Latino
together
for
people to
Green
develop
Justice.
solutions that really address the needs of the communities that are being impacted. And it's a way that communities can gain power, coming together before policymakers, making sure that they understand that these communities are paying attention, that they are advocating, that they know what needs to be done, and that policymakers realize that this is a community that needs to be respected and that's willing to stand up for itself. And by working through the Latino Climate Justice Framework, we are elevating these issues and ensuring that it's not just those who have the power who are having their concerns addressed, but that these communities are also front and center in the policy debates.
Thanks for showing that, Ian.
Yeah, we debuted that at our national fly-in every Hispanic Heritage Month. We go to DC where we all started and we bring our voices there. But we also do it at Latino Advocacy Week here in Colorado as well, where we bring our voices. And so I think it's a good ending that there are a lot of problems facing our community, but there are a lot of brilliant people who are coming together. And we all come from different backgrounds, but our solutions are pointing us in the same direction. And so I hope that you leave today with hope that we can make a difference, hope that it isn't too late, and hope that it is with community that these problems will be solved.
Thank you, Ian. I have posted the registration link for our next webinar, Local Government Planning for Healthy Electric Homes, on August 7th, a week from today. And does anybody else want to share any announcements before we close? All right. Well, stay tuned because all of our organizations are doing important work and we do everything we can to engage the greater community, and that means you. Oh, we have a question from Elizabeth Cohen. Elizabeth, let me call on you here. Okay. Yes. What would you like to ask us, Elizabeth? There you are.
Oh,
sorry.
Hello, everyone. So I just wanted to, I work for the Office of Climate Action for the City and County of Denver. And we were just wrapping up our Heat Summit series where we were working with city agencies, businesses, and community organizations to come up with solutions for extreme heat. And I just wanted to let everybody know on the call that we are really going to be diving into the solutions that were suggested at our last summit and asking people for their interest as we move forward. So that will all be posted on our social media when we're calling for different groups to participate in different solutions. So I just wanted to let folks know that we're working on this, and we'd love your participation. So thanks for the opportunity.
That is so helpful to know, Elizabeth. I have posted my email. If others want to add their emails to the chat, please send us all the information that you have on Denver's Heat Summit and subsequent just conversations and policy venues so that we can participate. And I'll be sure to reach out to you as well. I'm really delighted you're here to share that.
Thanks for hosting this. You did a very good job advertising, because there was several people who reached out to me about this. So good work.
Wonderful. Well, thank you. We'll definitely be in touch and follow up on that. I appreciate your work and a lot of the work that Denver's doing, and Denver will be featured in our local government webinar next week. So maybe we'll hear a little bit more from you about that Heat Summit as well. Anyone else before we close?
We're stronger together. We gotta do this together. We can't do it alone.
That's right. Thank you, Rachel. We need you. Absolutely. Okay, well, thanks everyone for coming, and we will be in touch. Stay cool, be cool, be yourselves, and keep fighting. Take care. Bye-bye.